Okay, everybody, uh, welcome, and we're going to be speaking today about language content. We are continuing our consideration of language in terms of relationship making, and in this case, this is going to be language content, or we're going to be focusing today on semantic relations and specifically Bloom and Leahy's content categories. Before I begin, actually, let me show you a little clip again from that play of my dress-up play that my kids engaged in a number of years ago. And let's look at that for a moment.
A story about Paralygacha.
Please. Please say
Oh
it.
my god, it's getting wet. What is him? He's peeing. Underwear. It's okay. Did you hear that? One more time. Farewell, Ultravis. Farewell, stop it. Sunglasses in here. Turn around. Turn around. Okay, now. Sunglasses, man. Now he's really ready. Now he's really ready. Now he's got his super undershirt.
And now we could really look at what we're in fact going to be looking at, those utterances that children make, such as produce, such as my own kids did when Cameron referred to sunglasses man, and Jordan referred to the super undershirt, and that Sammy the shark was wearing. Now we can think about those meaning essentially two ways, and let's go to the slide here. We can think of meaning from an empirical point of view, meaning the specific, observable, perceivable, measurable, conceptual perhaps, objects, actions, attributes, states, etc., that the speaker refers to. So Cameron was talking about sunglasses, and we know what that means. And so does, of course, Cameron, those cool glasses that his little stuffed animal was wearing, that he in fact put onto that stuffed animal. And Jordan, with his super undershirt, he knows what super undershirts are all about since he's seen them on TV. He's worn them himself since he was at that age somewhat obsessed with super undershirts. And in fact, he's 14 now, and believe it or not, we're approaching Halloween, and he is going to dress as Power Ranger. I said he should put on, I have the original Power Ranger suit that he wore in my office, and I was going to see if he could, how close he could get to fitting on it. I said he should probably tie it around his neck or something like that. You believe it or not, at 14, he's still going to be a Power Ranger. And that's the empirical meaning, but also we can think about it in terms of the relational aspect of meaning. And by that I mean the kind or type of meaningful relationship that is being made in the mind of the child or the speaker. And that relationship is always going to be between the subject of the sentence and the complement of the head verb in the sentence. It's always going to be logical and universal and generative, these kinds of relationships. You'll see what I mean in a moment. By logical, I mean it's going to make sense based on the kinds of relationships humans make in their minds that leads to generativity. What does generative mean? Well, if you remember in our discussions of Chomsky's perspectives on language, language we create sentences using our mind's relationship making characteristics or processes, we generate many different sentences that reflect these rules that we have in our mind. And we comprehend many sentences spoken to us by others by applying these kinds of relationship making processes or rules, we call them. They're really not rules like rules of game playing, but rather they are the non-conscious connections we make in our mind among things, and that we give meaning to, or that underlie the codes that we use to represent meaning. And these kinds of relationships we make, these meaningful relationships we'll be talking about today, they are universal. You'll find them made by children and ultimately adults, across languages, across cultures. The specific objects that are spoken about by specific cultures, specific individuals, influenced by their specific experiences, those will be different. Will differ from person to person, family to family, culture to culture. But the kinds of relationships that are made, that are reflected in the sentences made, those will be universal. Now, I was going to make these next two slides into a reflection experience for you, where you yourselves would answer these questions that I asked. But I've decided to talk about this, think along with you, or help you reflect on these things here. Consider this, because of just introducing the material, I thought maybe it'd be helpful if I work with you on this. So let's think about this for a moment. A child notices a ladybug. Mom exclaims, "Look, a ladybug." The child then says, "Ladybug." What would have been the source of the child's acquisition of the word ladybug in this case? Is it relational or experiential? That is, from a specific experience in interaction with somebody else or in the environment somehow. And I think we would all say, I'll give you 1 second to answer that question for yourself, but I think we would all have to say experiential. The child experiences the ladybug and mom's labeling of the ladybug. Look, a ladybug. The child next says the ladybug flew up to the light. Now, what is the source of the child's creation of this sentence? Is that experiential or relational? Well, partially, of course, experiential, perhaps. The ladybug may in fact have flown up to the light, right? But I am going to say, and I am going to try to help you understand, that there is a relational source that led to that or supported the production of that sentence. Because the child is making a relationship here between the ladybug and the light by virtue of flying. Now, of course, the child had experience already with ladybug, experience with lights, experience with flying, experience with up and down, perhaps. The child has the meaning of each of these things experientially. However, the child had to, in his or her mind, put together the subject of that sentence, ladybug, with the object of the sentence, light, and by virtue of a change in location, a locative action, a location change. Now, the ability to think location change that and put therefore the subject of that sentence together with the object of the sentence, that is ladybug together with light, by virtue of the action which was specified here, fly, I was going to say flow as the root verb, but it's really fly. This is past tense. And the shift in location up, well, that's a relation. That child has to be able to make the relationship. At a certain age, kids will only focus on one thing at a time, like ladybug. Say if the child was 1.5, say. But if this is say a 2.5-year-old child or so, and the child's already making location relationships, well, the child would have to be doing so in order to generate that sentence, if you're following me. It's a relationship between ladybug and light by virtue of flying. In fact, all sentences code relationships. And it is the nature of the relationship that we are going to be speaking about. That's a source of meaning itself. The nature of the relationship between the subjects and objects of sentences. That is and we're going to characterize or name those relationships by identifying Bloom's content categories, because that is what Lois Bloom and Margaret Leahy did, particularly Bloom. Lois Bloom, back in the 60s, she did research in which she characterized the kinds of relationships children made, that meaningful relationships that were reflected in sentences, something that had not been done before. So let's take a look at this. Now let me say this again then in another way, but the same thing essentially, as I'm being a little redundant here perhaps. And that is, sentences represent universal logical relationships imposed upon empirical discoveries. Universal logical relationships imposed upon empirical discoveries. That is, the child represents objects in their environment and experiences that they have. That's empirical, coming from their experiences interacting with family and the environment, friends, etc., people and objects, but they also make relationships among these individual things, because everything is individual out there, or that is ultimately represented in the mind. The computer is something, the table is something, the wall is something, a ladybug is something, mom is something. They're separate individuals. Something has to pull them together in a meaningful way, and it's of course the relationship-making property of the mind. And meaning is generated by this relationship-making property. Interestingly enough, these meaning relationships are universal and have a logical element. Logic meaning that, again, something to do with the way the mind makes relationships. They are imposed upon objects. And they can be imposed two ways, really probably multiple ways, but two that will be extremely interested in this course on language acquisition. Action through play. Look again at that video. Look at my kids playing, or any child playing. You see them in their dress-up routine, their animal dress-up routine, making relationships between sunglasses and one kind of an animal, or an undershirt and a shark. And I mean relationship in the most direct and simple, basic way. They put things on and took things off, put things together and take things apart. We'll ultimately refer to this to relationship making that occurs in the mind as merging things, But that's a fancy word for relationship making. So relationship making can occur physically, and that's exactly what kids do when they play, or mentally. And that means remember again, language content refers to ideas, that is, these linguistic objects in our head the world as it is represented in our mind, or our view of the world as we represent it in our mind, each of us, including each child. And those objects that are represented are in the mind, of course, are then made into relationships, brought together, merged, and given relational meaning. Relational content is represented via subject-verb-complement sentence relationships, or two-verb relationships between or among verbs. And we'll be looking at that in some depth, in fact, great depth, as we proceed across this course as we try to understand what language acquisition in children really is about. What are they acquiring? One thing they are acquiring is relationship-making capacities. And we will say, and this is a fancy and perhaps weird statement to make, but the mind is really computational. Language, in the Chomskyan sense, as a product of the relationship-making property of the mind, both in producing and comprehending things. Computation occurs to establish or comprehend meaning. And that computation occurs with reference to the heads of phrases. I say computation on the head, term I use. What I'm talking about there, we will develop further subsequent to today's session. We're not going to be spending time today on looking at how meaning relates to heads of phrases. We will be looking further into that as we look at syntax. Now, what are categories of relational meaning? That's what I'm going to spend the rest of my time with you here today, identifying in a relatively straightforward way. And then we will look at children's language and practice identifying these categories and analyzing language with reference to these categories when we meet. So one set of these relations, meaning relations, are object relations. And they're reflected in sentences that have subjects, one subject, one verb, and often a complement of the verb, or an object. We used to call the complement object, direct or indirect object. We'll refer to the objects of the verb, phrase, predicate as complements. So object knowledge. And the first set of these content categories are that reflect object knowledge are reflexive object relations. And the content categories are the relational knowledge, the relational meaning is first existence. That's the first content category. And that will be indicating a relationship between the specific object of the sentence and its subordinate categories. So an example is, this is a cat. The this word, this, that's a specific thing. Cat is the category that this belongs to. When the child says this is a cat or that's a cat, that's the specific thing, and cat is the category of thing. It could be a dog, it could have been a bear or something, but it's a cat. Following me? Now, existence, by the way, these content categories can be, some of these content categories are also reflected in the, can be expressed in single words, like if the child says cat, just cat, we'd also call that existence. Disappearance, and recurrence are two other reflexive object relations. Disappearance typically is coded. I forgot to put the example up here on the slide, but disappearance, an example, all gone, or cat all gone cat, or no cat. And recurrence is usually coded with the word more. After the cat runs away, the child might say, more cat. Or when the child finishes a cookie, more cookie. That is referring to an object coming back again. A relationship, by the way, between its present absence and its coming back. Disappearance, a relationship between the object having been here before and now gone. Disappearance. These are reflexive object relations. Now, between object relations, there are a number of these content categories. One is action, the relationship between the actor and the object acted upon by consequence of a specified action. For example, the girl kissed the boy. Relationship between girl and boy by virtue of the action kissed. Locative action, we've mentioned really already. Relationship between an actor or object and a change of location. For example, the girl crawled into the tunnel. A relationship between girl and tunnel by virtue of crawling. Now notice again, we can be referring to the specific meanings of each word, but we're not, are we? We're saying this is the kind of relationship that the mind is making to generate this sentence. This is an action that changes location. It's an action in which location changes. That's the logical, universal, and generative relationship, meaningful relationship being made underlying this sentence. The girl crawled into the tunnel. The boy went to school. Mommy went to the store. All of those are locative action relationships and require the child to make that kind of a sentence, to make relationships between these different objects. Now again, the child can also express these content categories with less words. In incomplete sentences or phrases, the child might say crawled into the tunnel and left the girl out, or kissed the boy. We'd still call that action or locative action. We are going to see how we do the analysis subsequent to this overview of the content categories. Now there's a distinction between movement, location relationships that involve movement and location relationships that involve no movement. So a relation between a specific object and its location in which there is no movement is a locative state relationship. Locative state content category. So the hat is on the table is an example of locative state. That's different from the cat jumped onto the table. Another sentence that would be locative action. Back to this content category, the relationship between an actor and a change in location. Or the hat fell onto the table. Locative action. The cat jumped on the table, locative action. But the hat is on the table, or the cat is on the table, locative state. Developmentally, locative action precedes locative state. In fact, it's always the case that something in which the child is acting upon an action kind of content category, or the name of an object that's being acted upon, always is developmentally an earlier developmental achievement than a static event, a static content category. Now, there also object relations can be within object relations. The previous relationships that we've identified, action, locative state, were between two objects. For example, in locative state, the hat and the table. But within object relations, we can have relations between part-whole relations between things, between a specified object and an attribute, for example. As in, the cat is the hat. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm thinking cat as I look at hat. But I'm thinking the cat. I could have said, I should have written the cat is brown, but I wrote the hat is brown. Still, that's attribution, a relationship between the hat and a part of it. It's a part-whole relation. Or I think the next one will be state. Yes, state. That's a part-whole relationship between a specified object and its internal state. The girl is sad, a relationship between the girl and her feeling. Or I want, another example is of a state relationship is the girl wants a cookie. Wants, a relationship between a girl and a cookie by virtue of wanting. Well, wanting, the girl needs a new pair of shoes. Needing, having, the girl has a hat. These are state relationships. Okay. There are additional meaning relation categories within single verb sentences that are captured by sometimes individual morphemes or words that we're going to look at further when we make distinctions between what we are going to call verb relation and non-verb relation content categories. But today we're simply identifying these content categories or these categories of relational meaning. So one is temporal, and additional, again, we're continuing on with these content categories or semantic relational meanings. One is temporal. Now we could say it's 3 o'clock, time statement, or it would be a relational if we said I'm going to the store at 3 o'clock. It's between the relationship between going to the store and the time. The temporal relationship is also picked up or coded by tense. So I went to the store yesterday, went, past tense, or will go tomorrow. Relationship between going to the store and the time. Now, time is an extremely important relationship. If you remember, and we're going to be speaking more about this when we talk about syntax, time, all sentences are really situated in time. And without time, no sentence. Time has to be coded one way or another. Has to be expressed. It's so important that Chomsky calls a sentence an inflectional relation, which is a time relation between a subject and a complement. Things have to occur in time because the human mind requires that. So temporal relationship is often explicitly expressed in sentences, and that's another content category that we'll find in sentences. Possession, that is my hat, relationship with the hat and the owner. Or a sentence like I have a hat, the verb have typically codes possession. And that's a possessive relationship between myself, the hat, and my own personal self. I was going to say my personal head, but what can I say? A dative relationship, that means a relationship between an object and its recipient. This hat is for mommy. For mommy it codes a dative relationship. For mommy. That hat is for mommy. Quantity, i.e. number, coded by most simply and directly by the plural morpheme. S, for example, or is, as in watch, watches, pizza, pizzas, or by numbers like three hats, 3 coats, whatever. It's a relationship between the number and the object. Negations, and there are 2 types that get their own content categories. That is saying no to something. So there's rejection, which is typically coded sometimes, of course, by single words like no, or by the combinations of words like I don't want it. Well, I don't want it, or no, no spinach, no vegetables. I hear that from my kids, of course, regularly. And denial, which is another category, negation category, in which the truth of something is denied, of a statement. For example, I'll tell my child maybe, no, that's not spinach, that's candy. It's green candy. And they'll say, no, it's not. That's denial. No, it's not. That's denial. No, it's not. There are other forms of negation too, just no, like no candy or something like that. In which if you can't quite identify the negation as rejection or denial, we simply state it's another form of negation, the relationship. Now, all of the relationships that I have, the meaning relations, semantic relations, content categories that I've identified so far, I'm going backwards here. Whoop, I went back too far. Are object relations. They are relationships that occur in single verb sentences. For example, again, all of the examples I've given you, this is a cat. That's a single verb sentence or relationship between a specific instance of a cat and the cat itself. Or action, the girl kissed the boy. Single verb relationship between the two objects. Or we saw relationships between objects and their parts. Also single verbs though, see, is. Single verb sentences. In temporal, possession, dative, quantity, and negation, as I've spoken to them, occur in single verb sentences, as I've spoken about them. But there are, as the child develops, they become capable of making more complex relationships. Not about single events, but they bring events together and create conjunction sentences with two verbs in them. And each verb is an event, represents an event. And that's a more complex relationship because it's a relationship between the objects in one event and the objects in another event by virtue of two verbs. So event relations are evaluated by the relationships between the two verbs that occur in multiple verb sentences. So we have a set of these kinds of relationships that occur in these kinds of relationships, these content categories, there are groups of them that are represented or expressed using particular kinds of syntax, which we'll again speak about further when we discuss syntax. But the first set of event relations, relational meanings, will be reflected in conjunction sentences. And a conjunction sentence is a sentence in which there are two sentences connected by a conjunction. And a conjunction is a connector word like and, or and then, or because, or stuff like that, but, etc. So now the first kind of relationship is no relationship. The relationship is two events brought together, but there's no meaningful relationship between the two. For example, it's raining outside and I'm hungry. Now there's no real relationship between raining and being hungry, so that we call that additive, and kids will do that. They'll relate two events, although there's no meaningful connection between them. As opposed to temporal, another event relation content category, Mom went to the store and bought a pizza. Well, there's a relationship between going to the store and buying a pizza. Going and buying. And that is a time relationship. because you have to go to the store first to get the pizza. Now, she could have said, and then bought a pizza. Then is a time, signals a time relation, but even without the then, that is a temporal relationship. It is a time sequence. Now, a causal relationship would be is another event relation content category, reflected in a sentence such as, Mom bought the pizza because I was hungry. The relationship between buying and was hungry is causal. Following me? The child codes that directly. Now, if the child could have said, I was hungry and Mom bought the pizza, and not use the conjunction because, still I'd call that causal. I was hungry and Mom bought the pizza. I'd still call that a causal relation. I'd analyze that as causal. Now, the child could have said more directly, I was hungry, so Mommy bought the pizza. So is a conjunction that also indicates causality. Child, in more complex utterances, it could be, when I was hungry, Mom bought pizzas. That too would be causal, even though there was a when, it suggests a time sequence. But it's more than that. It's a causal connection. Now, each one of these things requires the child to be able to make that type of a relationship in their mind, which has meaning to it. It's meaningfully generated. A time sequence, a cause connection, and then the last type is adversative of event relation, as in, I acted hungry, but I really wasn't. Look, I misspelled but. How sad. I acted hungry, but I really wasn't. Adversative is a comparative relationship between two events, and a comparison relationship, or comparative, where one is, in a sense, contrasted with the other, or is the opposite. You see, I acted, but I wasn't. See that? And but is a typical conjunction that connects these things. In more advanced speakers, or in literature, you might say, I acted hungry, however I wasn't. Or you might say, although I acted hungry, I wasn't. All of those are conjunction sentences that code adversative. And event relations, you see how this is way more complex than those object relation content categories that are represented in single verb sentences. Now, in these sentences, you see, went to this. If I split this up and looked at just one of you can't see what I'm doing. I'm covering up half of the sentence. If you look at one part of that complex sentence, one of the constituent sentences, you find those earlier content categories there. Mom went to the store. That's a locative action relationship. Bought a pizza. That's an action relationship. However, when we get to event relations, complex sentences having multiple verbs, we don't bother with these single verb content categories. We don't analyze them, that is, necessarily, because it's gotten too complex. There they are. The child by the time, if the child is producing a two-verb sentence, then they have all of these single verb relationships, and so we focus on the relationship, the two-verb relationship, and the relationship is really focused on the verbs. Really, the verbs going and buying, or buying and being hungry, acting and was not, if you're following me. It's a little more perhaps than just the verbs, but the verbs drive the analysis. We will look at that in more detail when we get to the analysis part of this, when we practice our analysis. Now, another type of syntax is complementation, where there is a sentence that expands on, or a verb phrase that expands on a verb. And these complementation syntax, these complementation content categories that are coded through complementation are the following. Mood is the first that is acquired by children. And that's always in English, that is, and you'll find this across many languages, you'll find the relationship between a state verb want. Maybe this is being recorded, you can see the cursor, want, and in a verb like to go, which is an action verb in this form, this tense form, to go, that is called what? That's an infinitive form of the verb, a verb that has no tense. The tense is on the state verb. So want to go. Other examples are need to go, have to go, ought to go, should go, can go, let's go. All of those are mood or modal. Another term for the syntax is called modal syntax. And the content category is mood. I'll discuss when I see you personally why I'm referring to these as mood relationships. Another event relationship is epistemic. That is event relation content category. I know an epistemic refers to a cognitive relationship, a relationship of knowing, understanding, thinking, pretending. I know that you are mad at me. See, look, the verb know and a sentence that expands on the verb. The object of that verb is a full sentence. You are mad at me. Communication. I said that I was mad with you. Look, I misspelled mad there. I said I was made with you. I said that I was mad with you. Well, oh wait, sorry. That's communication. Did I say communication? Communication. That's another event relation content category. Because the verb said is about communicating. I communicated that I was mad at you. I said that I was mad with you. I commented that I was mad at you. I exclaimed that I was mad at you. All of those are communication sentences. Knowing, understanding, and they all pattern. All those types of verbs pattern. They take full sentence complements, often with the connector that. And notice perception, you saw that I wasn't talking. That's another of these event relation content categories, involving perceiving or different types of perceptions or noticing. Notice, so seeing is noticing. You saw that I wasn't talking. You noticed that I wasn't talking. You perceived that I wasn't talking. I heard that you were angry with me. All of those are notice verbs, and they pattern just like epistemic and communication. All three, epistemic, communication, and notice perception, pattern the same way. They have state of verbs of a verb followed by a full sentence that says what's thought about, knowing, thought that, need that, know that, understand that, epistemic, communicated about, said, told you that I was angry with you. All of those are communication. Notice perception. You saw that I wasn't talking. Heard that I wasn't talking. Perceived, sensed, etc. Following me? One other type of event relationship, and then we're done with these, and this is about as far as I'm going to go today, actually. And this is a relative clause syntax, and the content category of the meaning relation is called object specification. And in this case, there's a phrase or sentence that doesn't say what the verb doesn't expand on what the verb is indicating, as in I know, followed by a verb, a sentence. I know that that the session is coming to an end. I know, with a full sentence. That would be complementation syntax, and with the content category epistemic. I know. In this case, there's a phrase that expands on the noun. So, who was hungry? The boy who was hungry ate the pizza that his mom bought. This one has two relative clauses in it. And a relative clause is a phrase or sentence within another sentence that's part of the noun, phrase, subject, or the complement. And it expands on the noun. It gives you more information about the noun. So the boy, that's the noun, the boy. So, in fact, the core sentence is the boy ate the pizza. The noun is boy, but we have additional information about the boy. The boy who was hungry ate the pizza. So that's object specification. Who was hungry gives us specific information about an object, boy. Ate the pizza, pizza object. Now here, that his mom bought. His mom bought. That is a phrase that gives us more information about the pizza. So we got object specification because of the who was hungry, expanding about, giving us information about an object or noun, boy. And this is double object specification because there's a second specification here about the pizza. You following me? And these are sentences really within sentences. There are multiple verbs. Was hungry, mom bought. Was hungry, well there's was, there's ate, and there's bought. A lot of verbs. So this is another event relation sentence that in the last type that is in a relative that is coded through relative clauses, and that indicates conveys the meaning, object specification, that event relation meaning. Okay, that's as far as I'm going to go today. There's another piece on meaning that has to do with case assignment, but I think that we've gone through a lot of information. I will be expanding on this, and we will be practicing by looking at children speaking, and we will spend our time, quite a bit of time understanding how to analyze sentences like this. I wanted to introduce you to these relationship-making content categories. In fact, I'm going to skip to the last sentence, the last piece here, and simply state that language acquisition in children involves the acquisition of multiple semantic relations. And these semantic relations are the meaningful relationships the child's making in their mind. These develop that allow the child to generate multiple sentences that embody these relationships: action, locative action, additive, temporal, causal, etc. Keeping in mind that this relationship making, this meaningful relationship making, will drive both the acquisition even of vocabulary and syntax.